Thank you, Ann. Welcome, everyone, to the 6th webinar in the Leadership Series, Taking It to the Next Level. My name is Jonathan Shaver from Envision Partners, a leadership development company focused on advancing the career development and impact of high-potential leaders in our agricultural industry. I am an associate member of the American Seed Trade Association and a member of the Management Skills Committee. The American Seed Trade Association works on behalf of the seed industry to promote the research, development, and movement of quality seed to meet the world's demand for food, feed, fiber, and fuel. We have a rather special format for our webinar today. This webinar is also being presented to a live audience here in Washington, D.C. at the American Seed Trade Association Policy and Leadership Conference. We welcome our live audience to the webinar, and we welcome the 60 or so participants who are online with us today. Today's webinar title is Leading Across Generations, Communicating with Influence. Today we will be hearing perspectives from across the generations on practical ways to overcome the very real communication barriers that can arise when multiple generations are in the same workplace. I am pleased to welcome today Andrew, Elizabeth, and Wayne. Andrew Lawver is a full-time agricultural law student at Drake University in their legislative and agricultural law certificate programs. Andrew previously worked for Senator Chuck Grassley here in Washington, D.C., and with DuPont Pioneer in Western Canada, Iowa, and Wisconsin. This summer session, Andrew is a government and regulatory affairs intern for the American Seed Trade Association and ready to share his experiences with us. Dr. Elizabeth Stolberg is a science policy manager at the Alliance of Crop, Soil, and Environmental Science Societies, which represents 3 scientific societies: the American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society of America, and Soil Science Society of America. The D.C.-based policy office tracks federal actions in agriculture and environmental sciences, provides their membership with action items and updates, and serves as a scientific resource for Congress. It's our pleasure to have Elizabeth join us from across town today. Wayne Gale is the 3rd generation of his family to work for Stokes Seeds Limited. After 6 years in the data processing field, Wayne joined the family business. Building on his background in computer science and business, Wayne has led the roles of data processing manager, controller, distribution manager, and now president and owner of Stokes and its related companies. Wayne Gale is currently 2nd vice chair of the American Seed Trade Association and has served as president of the Canadian Seed Trade Association. Thank you for joining us today, Wayne. We will hear from each of our guests today, and given the online format, we'll save our questions until the end. For our online participants, please send your questions or comments by email to the email address shown on the slide, ajorss@betterseed.org. And we'll assemble those questions for our speakers, and we'll respond to them in about the last 15 minutes. I encourage you to take notes. We will have a lot to learn from each of our guests today, and you'll want to try these ideas out. And with that, Andrew, I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and welcome to everyone in the room and online as well. We are excited about the topics we'll speak about today, and I will be focusing on 4 specific points. And the first point that I will begin with is listening. So as we think about listening in the workplace, it's extremely critical and perhaps one of the most important aspects. And thinking about the multiple generations that we have in the workplace, there are stereotypes associated with these generations that can create bias from time to time as well. And so when you think about boomers, for example, there's always a stereotype perhaps that technology is a bit tougher, perhaps not as good at that. And then millennials, for example, are quick with technology. They can effectively and efficiently use that and really advance in the workplace based upon their skills and competency in that area. Listening really helps to realize what's important to your supervisor or employee. And so especially in that onboarding process, it's very, very important to determine what is it that this employee is interested or what does my supervisor want. And don't assume anything throughout this process. So for example, as a new hire, perhaps a manager may ask, well, you're 22, just out of college, you can run our Twitter account because you know how to tweet. Well, it's possible that that 22-year-old may have never sent a tweet before. They may have other interests, and so it's important to really flush all of those questions out and get answers, and just don't assume anything in that case. And as an example, in my career, when listening was most important, occurred when I was leading a sales team in Wisconsin with two team members who were in their 60s. And it was my role to lead, again, two employees in their 60s and motivate them and challenge them. And that can be difficult when you're many years younger. But what I found was through active listening and questions about their careers and what got them to that point today, that's what really built that relationship.
Elizabeth, it seems like you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I think Andrew, he really said a lot about how you can learn through listening, not making assumptions. But I was thinking there's another really great reason to listen, and that's just to build relationships. Even if you don't think you're going to learn anything relevant, I think I, for one, am the type of person that sometimes just needs to talk out something. So if I have a half-baked idea, I might come to you and say, hey, can you just listen to me talk about this half-baked idea for a minute? And it can be really helpful for me just to have like a sounding board. By the same token, I think I have served as that sounding board for other people. And you know, whether it's an administrative assistant who wants to talk to me about her wedding plans, or a senior manager who wants to talk about a big event that's coming up, I think that can really, being that go-to person of someone who is helpful, who can just be that listening platform and, provide a couple of comments. You may not, all I'm trying to say is it may not seem like you're learning a lot. You may not even go out and ask, tell me about this, but just kind of being there for that can be really important for building relationships for your future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Certainly, those are important points. And next, we'd like to move to seeking and transferring institutional knowledge. And this is so important, especially in our industry, where experience really does help with decision making, and with the multi-generations in the workplace and the various trends that we've had in agriculture and across the sciences and the innovations, it's very important to seek and transfer that institutional knowledge. So as a first point, ask colleagues about their journey. It's unique to them, and they have a lot of experience to offer. So don't just barge in the first day and think that because you have a degree or some type of technical training, that you know more perhaps than someone who has years and years of experience. It's important to ask and actively listen and learn there. And there's a reason that an employee has 30 years of experience. If they've been doing a terrible job, they wouldn't have 30 years of experience. So really take note of the career that they've built, and perhaps try to model yourself after that. And then ask questions about the business in the 80s and the 90s and the 70s, even back before that too. That's where a lot of that learning takes place that will help propel your career as a young person. And as someone who may be exiting the business, it's your opportunity to really create that legacy and make sure that everything you've worked for is transferred for years and years to come. And in turn, ask questions about new technologies. On our family farm back in Iowa, my grandfather's 84, and he still combines to this day as long as we can get him up in there. And then my dad is in his upper 50s, and my brother and I are in our 20s. Each person brings different skill sets to the table, and it's very important to ask questions, and no question is a bad question. And then developing a mentor and mentee relationship. One of the things that's been most important in my career has been developing those mentors. Sometimes that's active mentoring, and other times it's just simply watching that person and how they interact with others. And for me, there are definitely a couple people, Jim Schweigert and John Chisholm, who really definitely lead by example. And so I challenge everyone to identify those people, whether they're new into their careers or toward the end of their career. The next point of focus is building that relationship. So relationships are built on trust and respect, and that must be present to really cultivate and develop a meaningful relationship. And then the next point here is be interested, not interesting in the workplace. As an interesting person in the workplace, you're going to have a hard time developing those meaningful relationships. But as an interested person in the workplace, you're going to be seen as someone who is highly engaged and really wants to make an impact. And take responsibility for making your own relationships better. If you have relationships that are a bit rocky, simply avoiding that person or just neglecting to really engage is going to make it harder to develop those relationships. And then never eat lunch alone. Everyone has to eat during the day, and everyone has to do it somewhere. So whether it's the janitor in your workplace who might have 40 years of experience, or a new hire who's working on a new venture and a project, have lunch with every person in the workplace, because those people are going to be the ones who tell you about the history of the company or about the new things they learned in at their college or university. And then speak up if you see potential areas for efficiencies. Building relationships through new technologies, especially for new hires, can be one way to do that. For me, prior to enrolling in law school, I had a precision agriculture business, and flying a drone, not only did growers think it was cool, it brought them some value as well, and that helped to develop that relationship. And then finally, being formal and understanding informal. There's a definite stereotype here that the millennial generation tends to be less formal. And I would say that in general that is true in some circumstances, that the millennial generation is less formal. But understand that stereotypes exist, but ask questions, why does this stereotype exist? A professional attitude is like professional dress. So on the first day of work, definitely having, or at a new role, having that professional attitude, and then realizing maybe this is a less formal workplace is something that's important to realize and be self-aware of. Just like professional dress, you're going to wear a suit, or make sure you have the right dress on that first day. Bring that very, very professional attitude the first day, and then if it seems like a more relaxed atmosphere, you'll pick up on that and can move forward. And then choose face-to-face communication. This is something that's extremely important, and I once heard a farmer voice concern over the fact that his agronomist was texting him about updates and meetings and had never called him about what was going on in that field. And that's very, very important to realize, what does my customer or what does my supervisor want in terms of the information they're receiving and how they receive it. Just because as a millennial, for example, you have more effective communication texting with others, that's not how perhaps it should be done in the workplace. And so choosing that face-to-face communication. And then as a final point, simply understanding an interest in work-life balance. Younger generations tend to feel like they're on the clock perhaps at all times because they have access to email on their phone and computer. And they may have a scheduled workout during the day over the lunch hour that may, or they may take off a little early and do something with friends, but then at night they'll get back to their emails and work and continue working. So just understanding the different outlooks on work-life balance, I would say, is something to be cognizant of.
Wayne, do you have thoughts about that topic?
Yeah, the face-to-face communications is an interesting one, especially with many young people compared to us older folks. I think the urgency factor is sometimes forgotten. I know I have a 3-email rule. If I haven't gotten what I want after 3 emails, then I typically pick up the phone or walk down the hall to go to the office to find that individual and hash out whatever it is that's confusing me. My son is an example of that. He loves to send emails out, and he works for us. And sometimes I'll circle back to him after a couple of days and say, well, whatever happened to that particular issue? And he says, well, I emailed him 3 days ago, and I haven't got an answer yet. And it's sort of like, well, half the company's waiting for that answer. So I think sometimes formal communications is something that a lot of people shouldn't forget about. That picking up the phone, talking to people, communicating people face-to-face has a lot of value, and sometimes running just emails or other forms of communications can be a waste of time or just not convey the urgency of the matter.
Very good. Appreciate those perspectives on communications from both ends of the continuum. We got the same message. Thanks, Andrew, for your comments. So now we'll turn it over to Elizabeth for some of her thoughts.
Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts when I was first approached about this webinar in terms of communication strategies, and I gave a lot of thought to what I've done that has worked and has not worked, and expressing confidence is something that I've found has been really helpful for me. Maybe some of you have heard of this thing called the imposter syndrome. This is where you don't feel like you belong, or that you're not the right person for the job. You were given this opportunity, but you don't deserve it. I've heard it a lot with reference to women more than men, but for men, absolutely, it happens too. And my thought was, sometimes you just have to express the confidence, even if you don't necessarily feel it on the inside. One of the examples I was thinking of in particular was I worked for about a year and a half where 75% of my job easily was on federal microbiome policy. And then I got a new job where there was a position open for the liaison to a microbiome committee. And I thought, I could do that job, and I made it clear to my boss that I thought I could do that job. And she ended up giving that job actually to 2 other people in the office. And I went to her and I said, this is kind of my thing, and I respect why you're giving it to somebody else, but can you tell me why, and what I could do next time, or what I should have done, and she said, well, they're more senior members of the office, and I said, okay, I understand, but I still think I'm a really good candidate for this job. And she called me back into her office a week later and said, actually, we decided to give it to you. And she had her reasons, and she made it clear she was doing me a favor. And I think she made it clear because she didn't want to insult these senior people in the office. They had a lot more experience than I did in general, even though maybe my experience was more relevant. And she didn't want it to appear that she was, promoting me over them. I'm not going to say I was the best person for that job, but if I hadn't gone to her and said, I think I'm a good candidate for this job, then it would never have happened. So sometimes you just have to, put it forward like that. And the other place where I think it's really important to express confidence is in your work-life balance, which Andrew kind of touched on a little bit. Not just kind of going and having that, middle-of-the-day workout session, for example, but being clear about it with your boss and with your coworkers. I have a 2-year-old at home right now, and my husband and I have not ruled out the possibility that we might have another one someday. And the fact is that I have never, and still do not, have a job where there is paid maternity leave. Now, my husband, he's a Fed. He's got a lot of sick leave accrued, and I said, if you want to have another kid, you probably have to take a paternity leave. And he said, I don't know how my colleagues are going to feel about that. That's not exactly a thing. I said, well, you can have them talk to me about it. This is 2018, and, kids need both their parents. And, if you feel uncomfortable about it, you should talk to someone about it, because it is absolutely within your rights to take that sick leave however you need to. And that's the only way we're going to make our family work. So, this is something that we can talk about. And just making those expectations clear to yourself and to your colleagues and your bosses is a lot better than kind of blindsiding them at the end. Like all of a sudden you're taking 2 months off. That's not helpful for anyone either. Oh, yeah. Thanks. The second thing I want to talk about is being grateful and being helpful. I think of these as really similar. Just thanking people for giving you opportunities. I've gotten a lot of opportunities, and I make sure to thank the people who have given them to me. I think it's really important. And just being helpful in return also can get you so much farther than you think. I had a situation where I was working on an agriculture workforce issue, and I had a big spreadsheet of contacts. And a very junior member of our office, he was working on a soil health initiative, and he asked me for this list, and he asked it in a way like, I know you're not going to give this to me, but I should just ask. And I said, why wouldn't? Of course, here's the contact list. It's not like a secret. And he really thought like we were in competition with each other, that it was going to put me at a disadvantage to give him this resource that I had been working on. And I said, that is ridiculous. We are working in this together. I believe in soil health. I think it's an important topic too. And he was really shocked that I gave him this contact list. And but I know that in the future he's not going to hesitate to help me out if I need a favor. I think those kinds of gives and takes are really important, even with people you never expect to help you. Like he asked me without any expectations, and the reverse. You can give someone a hand without necessarily expecting they're ever going to give it back to you. But being helpful to those around you really does give benefits just up and down the food chain, and you never know what's going to come. In this particular job, it was temporary, and I never knew what was going to happen next. I didn't know who my next boss was going to be, so I was just helpful to everyone that I came in touch with because maybe they were going to give me a job. And that's not just true at the beginning of your career. If you're an arrogant person who doesn't need help from anyone and doesn't want to help anyone else out, they're not going to you're not going to get that next job because no one's going to want to work with you.
Elizabeth, I really like that point about being helpful to those around you. That's critically important in the workplace, especially just as you may have interests or goals in specific areas. I would bring up one point just to think about for the group as well, and that's about managing this, especially early in a career as an employee and then as a manager, perhaps. How do you coach some of the newer employees who jump right in? And especially in those first several months, even years, there's a lot of, yes, I'll help with that. Yes, I'll help with this. I'll take on that. Do you have anything else I could help with? And all of a sudden you have multiple people putting projects on your plate, and they're not communicating with each other, but they're asking you, hey, have you had a chance to look at that yet? When am I going to see the results of that? And so I would just challenge everyone to be grateful and helpful, but at the same time know how to say no to specific things. And when you reply, simply provide several other resources. So by saying, well, I heard that Beth in a specific department is really interested in that, perhaps she would want to take that project on. Or, I know this great person who works for a company XYZ, perhaps we could hire them and, they might be an expert in this field. So helping someone, but also protecting yourself a little bit just to make sure that you do an excellent job for your company. Because if you get too spread out, it can be very tough to do a good job.
That's absolutely true. Setting limits is so important. And that's just a perfect segue also to my last point about giving credit and taking credit. Just because, if you're in a place where you can't take on a new thing and someone else, and you offer someone else's name, that helps them and helps their career. And the same is true for me. I've certainly been put forward as a name when someone else couldn't do something, and it's given me an opportunity. And just making sure to thank them is really important. So in terms of giving credit and taking credit, though, this can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I know friends who've had bosses who just take credit for their work and don't give them any credit, and it's demoralizing, really. It's very difficult to work for someone. You can get burned out really quickly if you don't feel like you're getting any credit for what you're doing. And this happens up and down the food chain. My feeling is that giving credit to others does not diminish who you are or what you're doing. And that it only serves to show you as a competent person who surrounds yourself with good people who do amazing things. And then those people really appreciate that. They go on and will serve to give you more opportunities later in life. I think it's really important to speak up if you think you deserve more credit on a project. My name should be on that report. Now, that being said, you may not always get the credit you think you deserve, and that's okay. Maybe you don't deserve it all the time. But just saying like, I think I do deserve this credit, if you really feel that way, is really important to do. Because if you don't ask, it's never going to happen.
Wayne, that gave you a chuckle there.
Yeah, well, the whole idea of giving credit where credit is due is probably one of the most important management items to watch. You want to make sure that people are appreciated for their work, and taking credit when credit's not due is probably one of the biggest sins you can do as a manager. We can all work harder in recognizing people within your team to make sure they, first of all, feel appreciated and also feel recognized in their efforts. You can win a lot of allies in your organizational structure when you recognize those people. I know it's one of the things that I'm always trying to remind myself to make sure that I do give credit when credit's due, and just simply recognizing people. It shouldn't be a task. It should be something that you try and incorporate in your sort of DNA. I know my father was always great at doing that, and he was won a lot of favors, and staff went the extra mile for him. It was very noticeable. Me being more of a computer person and sometimes relate better to computers than people, it's always been a little bit of a challenge for me, but it's something that I always strive to work better at.
That's a great addition. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your comments. And Wayne, we'll hear from you and your perspective.
Yeah, understanding others are different is another one of those concepts that I find a lot of people, especially younger people, have a problem with. That we're not all created equal. We all have different ambitions. We all have different ideas of life balance. So some people work to live and others live to work. Some people work a 10-hour day or 12-hour day and not even think about it. Other people hit the door at 4:59 and a half or earlier. I'd have to say my son is actually one of those guys that hit the door at 4:59 and a half. But he's also the type of person that if he works in our IT area. So if there's something that goes wrong in the evening, he's one of the first people that will volunteer to come in, or he'll sign on his computer and get on the system and fix it. So he never complains and never questions. But nevertheless, he likes to make sure that he meets his obligations at home, probably better than I do. Understanding that others expect what others expect not only of you, but but how you expect of themselves. So again, this is a little bit similar to the previous point, that other people are different. You have to understand other people's limitations. I think there was a great philosopher, Eastwood, who said, a man's got to know his limitations, and this is one of those things that you have to understand, that certain people have limitations. It's like a team of horses. You got some runners, and you got some that'll just run forever, and some that are quick and fast. So you want to understand what you can expect of others, and also what others can expect of you. And then the next point is people learn differently. Everybody is different. I am very much an experiential person or a written person. I'm very poor at verbal. I don't remember things well when spoken to. But if I write things down, or in university, I was the kind of person that got all the past exams and worked through them. I had to do my homework. I had to do all the questions. Otherwise, I was toast. For me to sit in a class and just listen to the professor, it just didn't stick. And again, that leads into another one. People learn differently. And then some people are comfortable in who they are, and some people are not. That's another thing you have to learn about people. People that are forward and will contribute at every opportunity are people who are comfortable with themselves. Some people are just not comfortable. They're shy. We call it shy. But I think you have to understand that about a person and try and use those attributes. The people that are really forward, sometimes you got to put a harness on them and sort of pull them back. But I think there's also the people that are a little bit more shy. They have a lot to offer, and perhaps you have to dig a little hard for those people and work with them.
So yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I think Wayne said a lot about how you manage your coworkers or your employees, but I also want to say that your bosses can be very different too. I've been very lucky. I've really had great relationships with all of my bosses, and all of them have given me opportunities. But some of them gave me opportunities like they were a matter of course, and others like they were doing me a favor. And I don't care. So long as you're giving me the opportunities, that's fine. But knowing the difference and knowing my reaction to that, and knowing that I had the one boss who would she made sure that she had a big enough table that everyone had a seat. If you went to a meeting, you sat at the table. And the other one, only the principals sat around the table. And if you were at the meeting and you weren't a principal, you sat kind of around the periphery. And you weren't supposed to talk. I learned that the hard way. And I didn't realize that, that why was I even in the room if I wasn't supposed to be talking? I personally feel strongly that if you're going to have a meeting, you should just have a big enough table. And if you're going to invite someone, that they should be allowed to speak or encouraged to speak. But not every boss is the same. And you have to understand, what their expectations are of you as well. And if they want to do you a favor by giving you opportunity, then great. It's still an opportunity. And it doesn't matter whether it was a matter of course or whether you kind of had to work for it a little bit.
So the next point is that I had was adoption of new technology. And as someone who has, when I went to university, I actually, as my introduction pointed out, I'm not an Aggie. I'm more of a computer person. I went to University of Waterloo, which was the birthplace of the BlackBerry. And I have a degree in mathematics and computers. When I went to school, we were still dealing with cards, which was one step above just simply plugging wires into a wall. So smartphones, a lot of people don't realize, smartphones as we know them today have only been around for about 10 years. So technology is moving quickly. The adoption of technology is quick. Some companies are better than others, and some people are very much different than others in adopting technology. Kind of like the discussion about learning. Some people know how to use technology, and some people are actually terrified of technology. So that's something that as a manager and as a coworker, you have to be able to understand that some people take to technology like ducks to water, and other people hate it. They're afraid of it, and they try and do everything they can to avoid it. The ability to harness technology may not fit older established habits. And that's, again, to do with people. You have a workflow or a work process in place. Introducing a technological amendment to that workflow can be difficult. People are comfortable in habits. So changing a habit is difficult. People come to work each day with an expectation of being able to predict what their day is going to be like. And if all of a sudden they land in the chair and they say, guess what, this whole system's going to change, you're going to have to learn how to use a computer, that can really ruin a person's day. So you really do have to be sensitive to how people are comfortable with technology and the function that they're in as to how easy it is to convert to technology. And again, it goes to the point that people are literally afraid of technology. So incorporating technology in some tasks is much harder than others. So it's always something that people and technology don't always mix, and sometimes they mix well.
Wayne, it's interesting you bring up the adoption of new technology and then also the BlackBerry as well. It reminds me, during the 2016 election cycle, there was an article that came out specifically discussing how the state of Iowa has to have the highest volume of flip phones anywhere in the entire country. And I read that, and I sort of took offense to it, thinking, what are they trying to say here? That the whole state of Iowa nearly is running on flip phones. And then I thought about it and what I did daily at that time through the precision agriculture, and the ag economy was very good for quite a number of years, and many growers purchased new tractors and new planters. And as you sit in some of these new tractors, you think to yourself, this is nearly a spaceship that could take us to the moon. I mean, it's that nice. And I thought, okay, so some of these people running a flip phone are driving these new tractors. And then as a millennial, for example, my role is to help this person perhaps figure out how to hook everything up in terms of the technology and whatnot. So with an intrinsic interest and a motivation to learn more across generations, whether you're in your 80s or whether you're in your 20s, there's an opportunity to work together to create efficiencies and productivity within your business or in your personal life as well.
So my last point is just never stop learning. As somebody who's been to university, I also have taken a number of opportunities to continue education through my local college. Also, there's in today's age, the online learning is huge. I have to say, I'm not great at that. I've only done one course that way. I found it very difficult. I know there's a lot of apps out there that I have Babbel. I've always had a dream of learning another language, and so maybe someday I'll be able to spend the time on those types of applications that allow me to continue learning. There's lots of opportunities like Babbel or other opportunities to learn online. There's a number of courses either through Purdue or other opportunities to learn online. So I think that's something that we can all take advantage of and work it into our regular day, whether it's after work or in some cases, many employers will provide work opportunities during work hours if you approach them. So it's always something to take a look at. Look at the local associations. ASTA has a number of learning opportunities. They have relationships with both Purdue and UC Davis. I know I send a lot of my staff on a UC Davis course called Seed 101. They have courses for both vegetable and flower seed, which is what we're into, and also field crops. Purdue has an excellent program. ASTA has the management course that they run every year. So, and those courses are all for people that have left school. They're not necessarily for people still within school. And I always try and look for new learning experiences and actually new mentors or new people. My involvement in the association for close to 30 years has taught me a lot of skills that I didn't pick up during university, on simple things like how to run a meeting, how to work with people, how to write reports. Those are the types of things that you may or may not learn in university. It's amazing how the things that you go to university to write a lot of essays and a lot of reports, but sometimes you don't even take a course on how to do it, which can be kind of astounding, as there are many different ways of writing good reports and bad reports. And always look for those new learning experiences that are not necessarily work-related. A lot of us have hobbies, but sometimes learning can be about a hobby and about improving your quality of life. They don't always have to be about work. So there's always those opportunities as well. And that helps create a rounded, happy person that works better at work.
Very good. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, Andrew, for your comments today. Now we have plenty of time for questions. And so I want to remind the audience, the virtual audience, that you want to submit your questions to ajorss, AJORSS, at betterseed.org. You'll see that on your computer monitor. So we have a few questions coming in, and so I'll start with this very first one that came in early during our webinar. So this one is, I think, towards Elizabeth, and so we'll start with you. So it says, in my Midwestern upbringing, my very Midwestern upbringing, it says, asking for credit feels like bragging. How do you approach this important conversation with the spirit of humility?
It's true. It's a fine line, isn't it, between arrogance and just getting credit for what you do. And I think it can be even harder as a woman to take credit. Traditionally, it's not been so easy. There are a lot of strategies you can use, and really depends on your personality. Some people might feel more comfortable, for example, kind of going behind the scenes and talking to other people on the report. For example, if there are 5 people on this report and you think your name should be there too, maybe you talk to 2 or 3 of those other people and you say, hey, why do you think my name wasn't there? If you feel comfortable. Another thing you could do is go to the person in charge, your boss or whoever it is, and say, something like, I realize my name wasn't on the report. It's cool. What could here are the accomplishments that I have. Just, bring them out. Here's what I've done. I did this. I see that so-and-so did these things. Just for the future, what could I have done differently to get more credit? These are difficult conversations to have. I'm not going to pretend that they're easy. They're not. The more people that do it, the easier it's going to be, because then the bosses too will have that experience of dealing with someone who's actually asking for more credit. I think you should give your boss a little bit of credit also for being open-minded or reasonable about it. You don't have to necessarily demand credit, but you can make it clear that you think, that what you did was enough. And but there is certainly reasonable interpretation open for whether you could have done more to actually deserve an authorship or your name, for example.
So what I hear you saying is that you can learn from that experience of not getting the credit. What is it that would have gotten me the credit, or what was your thinking behind this?
Right. So not just you learning, but also maybe your boss learning. Maybe there wasn't much thought into it. Maybe it was, honestly, it could have just been an oversight. Oh, you're right. You did do all this work. Oh, yeah, you can put your name on that report. That has literally happened to me. So, so sometimes it's worth asking. Even, it doesn't have to be a demand. It can be just an ask, like, what more should I have done? And they say, oh, yeah, that's right.
Very good.
It can happen.
Do you want to add?
So it's funny that this question was asked, because I'm from the Midwest, from Iowa, and I would say this is something that, it's very true and a stereotype. And then in the millennial generation as well, there's sort of two things that I think about. Growing up in a generation who received trophies for things that generally they didn't deserve would be the first thing. I'd be the first to say it. And then the second thing would be I was a child or adolescent of $7 corn, where basically you couldn't, it was easy during that time, to do well and things like that. But how do you ask for credit in this case, especially being so humble, growing up in a place where your job was just put your head down, work together, and everyone sort of gets the credit and not so much you specifically. But what I would say is ways that have been effective at getting that credit that advances your career and gets you new projects that are perhaps more exciting are just continually asking, where can I help? And generally, by volunteering and asking where you can help, you become a part of projects that you may not have become a part of before. And I was told once by someone about 12 years older than me in the workplace, if you don't think you can do something, you probably can. So really think about that if there's 1% of you that thinks you can do it, you have just enough to start the ball rolling that you probably can do it. And so I would just say, just actively ask where you can help, because those trophies I got for 4th grade soccer don't matter, and they're collecting dust. But the ones that I've received in my life later on, I didn't expect. But because I asked if I could help with things, people then recognized me, and that meant a lot more than that 4th grade trophy.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew, for adding that comment. So we have another question that's come in, and this one I think is built off of Wayne's comment about getting feedback or getting communication back, say, from an email that was missed. But it's a different perspective. So it says, as an intern communicating in the workplace, it can be difficult to get a timely response or one at all. And you could substitute, I think, any employee trying to get a response from somebody who might be senior. So how would you approach the situation when you've tried all the avenues of contact, including text, voicemail, and email, and time passes with no response? So we'll let anybody answer that who might have a thought about how to get a response from somebody who is senior to you in the workplace.
Well, that's almost exactly what I was talking about, is like pick up the phone, type thing, old technology, or just go in and knock on a door if you can do it locally. Everybody's day is busy. I know I get, when I'm away traveling, I can have stacked up over 100 emails. And quite honestly, I don't even know how anybody else does it. I barely have to do it. I sometimes have to lock myself in my office for like 3 hours just to wade through over 100 emails. So if it is urgent and it's important to you, I'd say pick up the phone. I can't imagine, you can leave a message on a voicemail, and yeah, there are people that literally don't pick up the phone. And I mean, then if you physically close to that person's office, just knock on the door or grab them at a cup of coffee or wait till you bump into the hall. I mean, I've sort of positioned myself where I would literally bump into them, and if that's what it takes, sometimes you have to do it. It depends on the importance of the issue. You know, do you really feel you have to go that far? But that is one thing I find with a lot of young people, and again, my son included, is he'll fire off this email and wait 3, 4, 5 days, and it's like, no, we got to get this solved like this afternoon. So yeah, picking up the phone, making face-to-face or verbal contact is always the alternative.
Right. So it takes courage to
Yeah.
show up at the office door.
Yeah,
Say,
I
I
guess-
haven't heard from you.
I guess that sometimes I forget. You know, I'm a pretty outgoing person, and going and knocking on your office, your boss's door can be a bit daunting. So I guess I have to watch what I say. I've always been an outgoing person, so yeah, it can be difficult for a person. Maybe work through an intermediary or another person if you have to. But yeah, if you're not getting a response, then you need to pick up and make it more of a face-to-face.
I just want to add really quickly.
Yes.
I have been in this circumstance where I knew my boss was just too busy. She had a scheduler. And, you know, if you don't have an actual person, you could just, like, look at their Outlook calendar. You see the meetings that they're going to, and you just position yourself at their door. And when they walk out, you just, like, walk along with them. Hey, can we talk about this one little thing? So I've definitely done that, where if I had to get an answer, you're just walking along with them
Stalking.
to their next meeting.
And the only thing I would tack onto that is have courage and don't be afraid to send a calendar invite, because it's probably not that they're neglecting, they're not interested in what you're talking about. It's just that they may not have time. And when you send them a calendar invite, they will notice, because that's taking up a portion of their day. And so they will contact you by putting something on their calendar. And so don't be afraid of that. Know your supervisor, but I wouldn't be afraid of doing that.
Very good. Those are great comments. Boy, now the questions are really coming in. So we have talked a little bit about communication style and communicating across generations. And so one of the questions here is about not the form of communication, email, text, or phone, but what kind of words might resonate with different generations. That's an interesting question that we haven't addressed. I thought maybe we'd try that one out.
Wow, I don't know that, well, of course, I'm a techie, so, I mean, I think it may not be so much the age of the person, although the age of the person could affect their technology or their communication style. So I would say, it's more about the person's position within the technology curve and how they like to communicate.
Yeah.
Well, so I immediately think about emails just in general, and emails are the enemy of time management. They just absolutely are. But when you're composing emails, no longer than 6 lines in the email, if possible. If you need to put more than that, make some sort of attachment, or just think about what you're writing and try to condense it down to 6 lines. And then the first part, don't ask the question at the end of the email, ask the question at the beginning of the email, because generally you may not have, the supervisor or whoever you're communicating with won't read the entire email, but they'll see in their inbox that first sentence and they'll read that. So ask your question first, because that's really what your email is about. It's the question, generally.
Very good. Thank you. All right. So here's a general question. Broaden it out a little bit. So how do you begin building a relationship, particularly when you have a senior person starting a new job reporting to a much younger person? Okay. So if you're that senior employee reporting to a younger manager, does it matter? If you're the younger manager who now has employees that are older than you, senior to you perhaps in the organization, does that matter?
So I'll start out just by saying that for me, it's all about respect. And the respect has to go both ways. Andrew was talking about, how he had 60-year-olds working for him when he was so much younger, but he had a great amount of respect for them. And that's kind of what brought him through. And for me, I actually ran a committee of, maybe a dozen people who were all much older than me, but we did it all on the phone. And they didn't know I was younger. And then when they finally met me, they were shocked at how much younger I was. And that really worked in my favor, but it only worked because, I treated them with the, respect, and I acted like I belonged there, and all the emails were very formal, and, there are ways that you can comport yourself that, makes them just as comfortable as if you were older.
When I was in the IT area, I freshly minted out of university, and during that time, people coming out of university were literally light years ahead of people that had graduated even as little as 3, 4, 5 years ago. And many times I was working with people that were quite a bit older than I. And I was also a co-op student, so even while I was at university, I had paid jobs working with older people. And it was a bit of a challenge, but you have to just try and present yourself well and with confidence. That's the key, and be sensitive to people's abilities and to their comfort zone working with you as well.
Very good. Thank you.
There's just a couple last points that I wanted to make there. So especially for generations who are more experienced, and when the new hires come in, especially, or the young employees, there's just one example of when I felt very small, and that was when someone once said to me, "You're going to be playing this young card for the next 15 years." And that was fine. They didn't mean it as a negative, but the way I felt about that was, okay, so for the next 15 years, no advancement may occur, right? And that's just sort of what you're thinking. And then, just in terms of feeling comfortable, I felt the most comfortable, especially when managing people who were older than me, because that whole team I was managing was older than me, when they would acknowledge perhaps a gap in knowledge and help me with it without me even asking. They'd say, "Hey, let's do you have time? Let's just chat about this for 30 minutes, just my experiences with this, to kind of help you." And that's leadership on their part, and as a person who's working under them, you're leading too, just in terms of listening to them share their opinion.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew, for adding that. Question for Wayne that comes off of Andrew's comments. So Andrew mentioned that it was important to build relationships when you start in a new role, new job, new company. As a senior leader in your organization, what should senior leaders be doing to build relationships with new employees or younger employees?
Well, my father was always the kind of guy, he had a saying, and he said he always entered the shop at the back door and walked across the floor to get to his office at the front of the building. And I think that's something that I always try to do is talk to everybody. I have a horrible memory, so names are really difficult for me to remember. But that doesn't stop me from at least acknowledging people's contribution and talking to people. It's not that hard.
Very good. Thank you. And so there's another question here that goes the other direction. Wayne talked about always continuing to learn, right, throughout his entire career. As a new graduate, a younger employee, we'll address this to Andrew, do you feel like what do you have to learn as a new employee?
There's absolutely so much to learn when you start, and millennials especially are seeking professional development and more growth and development. I don't know why. I'm sure there's folks who have an answer to that, but as millennials, especially with continuing education such as a master's or an executive MBA or something like that, our whole country is becoming more and more educated, and North America just more and more educated. And employees, especially top performers, are looking for differentiation. They don't want to be up against a peer, perhaps, and not be hired because they aren't prepared enough. And so they're really trying to get more education. And so being accepting of that and having those conversations as the younger generations, make sure that you make it known early that you have an interest in further education, because your employer needs to know that. And so it's just really important to have those conversations.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew. And so for our last question, we'll just keep them individual here. This one's for Elizabeth specifically, and if anybody wants to chime in. So you talked about expressing confidence and keeping your expectations high. How do you go about applying for a job or a role or taking on a new project that you may not be the best fit for, but you would love to have? How do you present yourself and your experiences, even though it might not, your experiences and skills might not be the most relevant to the potential job?
Actually, wanting the job, I think, is like the best thing that you can do, that you can make clear when you apply for the job. It's if you talk to most employers looking for a good candidate, it's almost like they'll say, we can teach you what you need to learn, but you have to really want it. They want someone who's going to want to be there. So if you're talking about something that you really love or would really love to do, I think that's the best thing that you can emphasize. And most people, they say write a job description where that's the perfect candidate, and they are not going to get 10 perfect candidates applying for this job. They may get 10 candidates, each of whom has between 50 and 80% of what they're looking for. So if you're looking at a job description and one of the lines is something, a PhD you don't have or experience you don't have or something, I would not write that off. I mean, I think just going in by saying, I love this company, I love what you're doing, here's why. I think I would make a great candidate because A, I'm willing to learn, and B, I really believe in this mission. I think that goes a long way.
Fantastic. Great response to close us up. So with that, I would like to thank you, Andrew, Elizabeth, and Wayne. And also thank you to the listeners and our live audience for your interest and active participation in this webinar. This was the last in our 2017-2018 Leadership Series from ASTA and the Tri-Societies. For all of those who listen live and for those who follow us on the recorded sessions, don't hesitate to network with any of our series speakers to help you take it to the next level as better leaders in our industry. We wish you well.